Because so many of these impacts are related to changes in the hydrological cycle, in particular increases in local and global evaporation, as well as changes in the type and location of rainfall events, we thought it makes sense this year to focus on atmospheric moisture, specifically the humidity that frequently plagues Iowa summers, as Betsy and Jean will explain. The current statement was endorsed by 190 researchers and educators in climate and climate-impacted fields across Iowa from 39 colleges and universities located in every part of the state. To the best of our knowledge, this scale of statewide collaboration is unique to Iowa, and we hope it provides us a valuable service to all Iowans. Now I'd like to turn it over to Betsy and Jean to discuss some of the specifics of this year's statement. Betsy?
Good morning. My name is Betsy Stone, and I'm an Associate Professor of Chemistry and Chemical and Biochemical Engineering at the University of Iowa. And I'm pleased to join leading Iowa climate scientists today to share the Iowa Climate Statement 2017. It's not just the heat, it's the humidity. We've certainly experienced some beautiful weather in Iowa over the last 10 days, marked by lower temperatures and lower than usual humidity, which make conditions exceptionally pleasant for your favorite outdoor activities. Our recent weather is made even more enjoyable by knowing that typical August weather is very hot and humid. As we look towards the long-term trends occurring over the last 4.5 decades, Iowa has been experiencing increases in humidity levels. In fact, significant increases in humidity have been measured across all seasons and all long-term monitoring stations in Iowa. For example, April, May, and June humidity across Iowa has increased by 8 to 23% since 1971. Humidity couples with temperature to create the heat index that is a measure of how hot it feels. On July 21st of this year, Des Moines experienced a heat index of 108 degrees at 3 p.m. when temperatures hit 100 and the dew point was 71 degrees. For Des Moines, absolute humidity has increased by approximately 12% since 1971. Dubuque had the largest increase in humidity for springtime at 23%, followed by Cedar Rapids at 22% and Sioux City at 9%. Eastern Iowa has experienced a greater humidity increase than Western Iowa. The data show a 5% increase in humidity per decade for Eastern Iowa and less for the western part of the state. I'd now like to turn it over to Professor Jean Tackley, who will talk more about how rising humidity brings significant challenges to Iowans. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. I'm Gene Tockley. I'm on the faculty in agronomy at Iowa State University, and I've been doing climate research and education since 1988. We chose the topic of increasing humidity for the 2017 Iowa Climate Statement because it is having an impact on all facets of life in Iowa, and because it is a rarely discussed but important factor in the climate change of our state. Besides making outdoor activities like visiting the state fair more uncomfortable, increasing humidity or more moisture in the air creates conditions favorable for increased rainfall, extreme rain events, mold and mosquitoes, impacts that we Iowans are well accustomed to. Increased humidity affects Iowans where we work, live, and play. For Iowa's agriculture, increased warm season humidity leads to erosion-producing rain events and waterlogged soils during the planting season. Rising humidity also leads to longer dew points and higher moisture conditions that elevate costs of drying grain. Increased nighttime temperatures coupled with humidity causes stress to people, crops, livestock, and pets. Higher nighttime temperatures in August also reduces the grain weight of corn. High levels of humidity also create hazardous conditions for Iowa workers and sensitive populations through the danger of heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Asthma is worsening by higher levels of allergens in the air, and the cost of air conditioning homes and businesses to maintain comfort levels increases. Humidity also affects materials, leading to more than just out-of-tune pianos and frizzy hair. Increased moisture in the air accelerates metal corrosion, rot, and warping of wood, and peeling of paint. Iowans should recognize that higher humidity is more than just an annoyance. The increasing costs of more flooding, insects, mold, mosquitoes, humidity-related health issues, grain drying, air conditioning, erosion, etc., are evidence that climate change in humidity already is having a negative impact on both public and private checkbooks. Scientists now have good evidence that this rise in humidity is due to increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and likely will increase in the future, as reported in the recently released Climate Science Special Report for the U.S. This should add incentive for us to reduce our carbon emissions to the atmosphere. Fortunately, in Iowa, we have rich resources of wind, solar, and bioenergy to contribute to state, national, and global efforts toward this end. Thank you. And I'll open it up for questions.
It's not really a news flash that it's humid in Iowa. You're saying that this is on the rise and is having detrimental effects. Is that trajectory going to continue as long as we continue status quo with what we emit as far as carbon, things of that sort?
Yes, this is pointed out in the Climate Science Special Report and some recent work republished in December of last year that shows the, particularly in Iowa and particularly in the spring, we have an increase in moisture transport from the Gulf of Mexico. And this is due to a warmer sea surface temperature in the Gulf produced by globally rising temperatures. This increased moisture source, coupled with an increased northward flow of moisture due to two effects. One is the strengthening of the high pressure system off the east coast of the U.S., and the other is the deepening of the low pressure system over the Rocky Mountains. And these two together create this increased flow of moisture from the Gulf of Mexico into the Midwest. And it tends to fuel these nighttime thunderstorms that we get in April, May, and June. So it leads to more heavy rainfall, more extreme events, more average rainfall, waterlogged soils, and so on. So the humidity is the behind-the-scenes factor, and these factors of increased temperature in the Gulf, increasing the Bermuda High, and deepening the Rocky Mountain Low, those are projected to increase in the future. So if we put those two together, we can pretty well see that our humidity in the state is going to increase, particularly in those months. However, I should point out that it's more than simply moisture transport. It's the rising of temperatures generally that leads to increases in humidity outside the growing season. So in December and January, we're having higher humidity, and that's just because we're having higher temperatures, which leads to more moisture in the air.
If this is coming from the Gulf and from the East Coast, there isn't a whole lot we can do about that here. Is there, I mean, this is coming from the outside?
That's right. It's not anything we can control other than to reduce the temperatures, global average temperatures. As long as we avoid making progress on reducing the atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide, these effects are going to increase. So it's at least through mid-century, where we have high confidence, we know that these increases in moisture in Iowa will continue.
It seems right now like the deniers are winning. Does it seem that way to you? I mean, what happened with the Paris Accord, et cetera? That there's kind of a mood in Washington within the administration that this isn't a problem, or if it's a problem, it's if you're balancing between it and jobs win out.
Washington doesn't always speak for the whole country. If we look at what cities and some states are doing, we see that there's a lot of action with regard to creating sustainable cities, implementing state policies regarding renewable energies. The private sector is stepping up with more wind power, with more solar. Citizens are getting involved in cities, residents are getting involved in cities like Waterloo, or Cedar Falls rather, where they have a large community solar garden. I can say that, and farmers are starting to put together the pieces now, that the flooding they see, the increased challenges to drying grain in the fall, the insects, the pests, the fungus, the mold, and so on, mold in our basements. Residents and farmers are starting to get the picture that maybe there's a common thread to all of this. So I think even though the dialogue at the national level would suggest otherwise, I think there's a growing awareness of the importance of this problem. And with regard to the Paris Agreement, we stand out from the world in that regard, but I think there are a lot of measures that are moving forward as if we were signers to the agreement. A lot of cities have set targets, and they certainly haven't abandoned those because of the status of the U.S. government in the Paris Accord.
Gene, I might just, we see our role here as scientists to convey the information that we find and to get across what we're seeing in our research. And it's true that there seems to be a devaluing of the value of some scientific work right now. Generally, you may find it as reporters as well, this question of, what's true, what's real. Our role, just like your role as reporters, which is to convey the news and let people figure out what they think, right? Our role as scientists is to convey what we're finding. And as these national trends fluctuate, we want to be there when people have questions and want to understand what's going on.
Anything in your studies why Cedar Rapids and Dubuque are higher than kind of towards the mid part of the state or anything over? Does it have to do with being over by the river?
Probably not being by the river, but there is, when we look at the moisture transport coming up from the Gulf of Mexico, the peak region of highest impact is centered about on the eastern Iowa border. This is in the April, May, June period. So it's more having to do with where this conveyor belt of moisture comes from, this atmospheric river of moisture ends up in the Midwest, and it seems to be tilting over toward the Iowa-Illinois border.
And that's why there's a greater percentage increase in eastern Iowa than western Iowa, I think you indicated that. Would that be the case, or is there more industry also on the eastern side of the state?
No, we attribute it to that transport in moisture like Dr. Tackley described.
With moisture, there's variability among stations, and it may depend on, for instance, Knoxville reported a very high heat index in 2011. Their station is located at the airport, which is surrounded at a very close spacing to cornfields. And so in the summertime, of course, corn transpiring contributes to these high dew points. So there could be these station-to-station anomalies just based on the location of the observing station.
Iowa's done a lot in the area of converting to renewable energy sources with wind, et cetera. Solar's starting to rise. Even with that being the case, these numbers seem to say that hasn't stopped the march of humidity and negative impacts that are coming to Iowa externally.
That's correct. We're not, Iowa's impact on the global temperatures is still pretty small. But can be very proud that we are doing our part. We stand out as in the nation. We are we are first in the nation in the per capita generation of wind energy, of energy from electrical energy from wind. So we're doing our part, and we're showing, I think the important aspect is that we are demonstrating that a high percentage of our electricity from renewable energy is not an unattainable goal. We can do it, we're doing it here. We have somewhere around 36% of our electrical energy is generated from wind, and it could be, likely it's going to go probably closer to 50% within a few years. And so we rank up with Denmark and Germany and some other nations with regard to our ability to generate electrical energy from wind. And this is all displacing the use of coal for generating energy, generating electricity. So we're a model for the country, for the nation, as to how we can be reducing our input of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere.
I'm going to add a little bit. And one thing that we often hear when people talk about conversion to renewables is the question of what will the cost be? Is it you mentioned jobs? Is it going to compete with jobs by driving prices up? And so one of the nice things about examples like Iowa, where we have done, as Gene said, a great job of increasing our reliance on renewables, is that it shows that we can do that without a significant increase in price. Iowa has not seen a rise in electricity prices like a lot of the rest of the country. And so as a model, we can help to demonstrate what can be done and what it costs.
Seems kind of on the one hand, you're saying the data is bad news, and there's good news in Iowa, but where does that tipping point come, that the numbers in your report start to show progress rather than continued kind of deterioration or warming?
With regard to warming, we're already committed to globally to another degree or so of warming, half degree, over the next 100 years. What we're doing today, the actions that we take really are going to have impact on our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And but we have a very important role here, because if we don't address this issue, we will surpass the 2-degree rise from the 20th century in global average temperatures. And then we start to have significant and negative impacts on our oceans, on our coral reefs, many delicate ecosystems. Our ice masses are experiencing major losses now, which are going to create a significant rise in sea level. We are already seeing the projections are that we will probably see a 1-meter rise in sea level by the end of the current century. This means that the Florida Keys will be underwater, that Kennedy Space Center will be underwater. Where are these people going to go? And other coastal areas will experience this kind of flooding. The military is worried about sea level rise. So there's a lot of impacts that we're having that we need to stand out as a model for how we can address this issue. So the impact is actual in terms of carbon loss, but it's also symbolic. And I think it demonstrates that even at the state level, at the community level, we can have an impact in the long term.
And just to add to that, climate change really doesn't have borders. It's something that's affecting all of the country and all of the world together. And so the improvements that Iowa is making cannot solve Iowa's problems alone. We have to work together as a country and internationally to mitigate climate change.